Welcome back, everybody. As you can see, I have all the body work done to this side of the car. Well, almost all. I still have a little bit left on the windshield. Kind of it on this side. And I have sanded it all to 40 grit sandpaper. So it's a pretty rough scratch. So I need to go over the whole thing with 80 grit to kind of smooth out that heavy scratch. I've gone over this fender with 80 grit and it just really makes it nice. And that 80 grit is just the right amount of scratch for a urethane high build primer. But I'm going to spray this whole car with a epoxy sealer first, and then I'm going to put on high build primer over the whole car, just like I have done with all of this filler. And I'll explain that as I walk around. Most people don't go this far, and in the past I didn't typically go this far, but I literally covered the whole side of this car with a thin layer of filler. And I have learned over the years. Let's talk about filler for a minute. I've got some examples of filler here I want to talk about, because I've learned the hard way on what kinds of fillers to use when it comes to quality. Not so much brand, it's just the quality, how much you pay. When I did my truck, I was on a budget. What my thinking was I bought low-cost filler. I wasn't going to do a whole lot of filler on the truck. There's just a few areas on some of the body panels, the doors. When I got everything to match up, I just used a skim coat, and I bought this from a local store, and I just said, I just want a good filler. Doesn't have to be the highest price. This was like 30 bucks, 35 bucks, about 4 years ago. I hate it. It is the only filler I have ever had that failed. I had 2 spots on the truck that failed. One just a small area that was easy to touch up, but the other was on the side of the bed, and it was a disaster. Fortunately, I noticed it failed after the primer. I put on the sealer, I was ready to paint, and it started to bubble. This filler bubbled all the way to the metal. Body filler you put on bare metal. Acid etch it, sand it with a good deep sand grit. I use 80 grit. It should have bonded, and it's bonded everywhere else I've used it. But again, it failed. I was using it on some areas in the hood of this where I wasn't too worried about it. I was using it along the edge and on the underside where I've been doing some heat shrinking, and it failed again. So this stuff, garbage. So I started doing some research. What is a good quality at an average price? Everybody says Evercoat. All the top ratings, you search top 10 body fillers, Evercoat. And then there's different grades of the Evercoat. I used this lightweight Evercoat. This was, if I remember right, it was around 65 bucks. I've used pretty much the whole can on maybe, probably most of the side of this car. I was almost out. So I went to get some more, and I just got lucky. A local body man bought a bunch of Evercoat Ultra Rage that was damaged, and he got a killer deal on it. He was selling 2 gallons with hardener for 50 bucks. 1 gallon of this is almost 150 bucks. I grabbed it. I grabbed both. I mean, I didn't want to pass that up. One, because I know Evercoat is a really good filler, but all the top body shops and all the top customizers use Rage Ultra. So I had to try it, and wow, I will never buy anything but. I don't care how much it costs. It is worth $150. And if you can get it on sale and get it for less, grab it. This stuff is amazing. It goes on so smooth, and it sands so quickly, and you can work it for so long. It's just amazing. I've never had a filler, the garbage I just threw out. I put that on, and I usually have it start to set up before I get a chance to use it all. It just sets up so quick. And I think that's part of the reason why it fails. It doesn't get a good chance to bond to the metal. This stuff takes quite a while to work with this material before it starts to really cure. And then it takes another maybe 10 minutes to cure. And it's ready to start sanding. It's just awesome. The garbage that I threw away, when I put that on, it cures quick, but it's sticky for 35, 40 minutes before I can start sanding. And then I start sanding and it plugs up my sandpaper. So I wait 24 hours before I can start sanding, and it's hard. It's difficult to sand. It's just junk. So buy Evercoat Z, I think it's Z Grip, or it starts with a Z. It's one of Evercoat's medium lines. That's a really good one too. So if you don't want to go $150, I think the Z is around 100, and then this lightweight is, if I remember right, 65, 70 bucks. Like I started to say when I went off on my fillers, because it is important to get good quality filler. I covered the whole side and hood of this with one coat. I sanded all of the paint down. I didn't completely remove the paint. There's areas on this fender that has the original paint because it has red oxide primer from the factory, and that primer is excellent. But not always. It really comes down to application and temperatures. There's so many factors. Well, the paint on this door was garbage. It was coming off all the way to the primer. So I had to strip it to bare metal. Both fenders, I had to go all the way to bare metal to get a good, solid finish. But here on the cowl and here on the rear fender, that paint is almost impossible to get off. It is so hard, but it is so smooth. It's not checked. There's no little cracks. Lacquers have a tendency to crack over the years. Those cracks will allow moisture in and it rots from the back side. None of that on this car. If it's solid, the whole hood on this was solid, why strip it off? It's an excellent base for a deep scratch, for the filler, and for the epoxy primer. The epoxy primer, I think, is a must to go over all the bare metal areas. So where I've ended up sanding through to the bare metal, that needs an epoxy to seal it. And if you seal the whole thing and then put your high build primer on top of that, you've got an excellent base. And especially if you go epoxy, urethane, and then a urethane paint and a urethane clear. All of those bond so well together. I have had fantastic paint jobs ever since I've learned these steps. Okay, I had a few, just some light dings on the fender. So I skim coated this all with one thin coat. And then there's a couple spots where I had to go back and put on a second coat. There was a low spot here and a low spot here. So that second coat, I was able to find it. Now with the first coat, I block sand this whole thing with a longboard. So sand the whole area, all the hood, all the fender, all the side with this longboard. It's probably 2 feet. And I use the 40 grit. And that will expose my problem areas. You can use a guide coat, but the sand scratch at 40 grit and the filler, you'll get spots like this that will show up where it's not quite getting sanded all the way, and then you'll have to hit it with another coat. So that's what I did here. I had a little bit of a low spot right here, so I gave it another coat. I had a couple of low spots here. You can see there was a low spot there. So that gives you your guide to go around and hit it with your second coat. And they're light coats, so if you do end up in an area, I had a spot right here that I ended up with a third coat. And then it finally covered. So I had a low spot here, and I ended up with 3 thin layers, and then I blocked it down. And this panel now is perfectly flat. And I've kind of done the same thing on this door. But using the longboard across all of these areas, you can see I am perfectly flat across all transitions. And that's where your metalwork comes in. By working ahead of time and getting all your metalwork as absolutely flat as possible, all your transitions from the edges of the door, the edges of the fender, and then go over with a skim coat, you can see I have some metal there, some metal there. I've got some metal areas here. So I'm getting all the way down to metal and then stopping. And then that's when I'm looking at my guides to see whether my gaps are good, if I've got a low spot on either side, if I'm too far into the metal and I'm ended up with not enough build on each side of it. But that is my ultimate goal. And then you can see I did a lot of body work, metal work on this fender step. That was a big gap here from the factory. So I split open the body, I pulled it back, I welded a plate over it, and got that to look like what it should have looked like from the factory, but never did. Just little details like that when you're doing custom work. Now, if I'm doing a car completely 100% restored, those kind of details, judges and buyers look for that. They look to see if, has this had rust holes in it? Was it repaired? And the bottom seam tells that story. So if anybody was to really be inspecting this car to see if it had rust, that original seam and the original metal underneath with a magnet on it would tell the whole story that this has never had those kind of patches done. And a good restorer could do those patches and hide it so that the average person wouldn't even know it's been repaired. By just covering the whole side of this car, every teeny little flaw is covered. There was a low spot right here. I probably wouldn't have even noticed until it was painted, and you'd look down the side and you'd see a little bit of a low spot. And then again right here, you'd see a little bit of a low spot. There was a little bit of a low spot here. Feeling my hand across those, I would have never known they were there. They're so subtle. It's such a light movement that you don't notice until you're in your primers and you're doing your finish sanding, and then you realize, oh, I've got a low spot here that I need to fill. Well, by putting a thin coat of filler across this whole body, then I'm using it basically as a high build primer. And there are some really cool high build primers that you can put on, and you sand and you treat it as filler. They're actually called a sprayable filler. They're pretty cool. I haven't tried them. I'm kind of stuck in my old ways. This works great for me, so this is what I continue doing. But this fender, again, I thought this fender was really smooth, and I ended up with some spots right in here that would have shown up in the paint. Definitely I didn't know about these two, and those showed up in the filler, and I had to put on another coat. I'm sure I would have found that in the primer stage, but I know for a fact now that all of this hood and fenders and doors and my gaps are absolutely perfect. And speaking of gaps, I'm really, really happy about this gap. All the Willys, Jeepsters, wagons, trucks, I very rarely see a hood that fits perfect. And I know why. It is extremely difficult to get a hood to fit on these and get the fenders to fit. I had to cut the supports off of the grill. There's a support that's down there on the bottom that holds it to the frame. I had to cut that off and lower this nose down almost an inch and then make me a new bracket to hold this on. Normally, you could get your finger in between the frame and this nose piece. But I had to lower it that far in order to get this hood to come down so that this gap would close up. I could get the gap tight here and I could get my fingers in right here. Because what it's doing is it's pushing the nose of that hood up and it's leaving that gap. And then I can adjust all of this so that's in alignment, and then it was buckling and bending and opening up a gap right here. So by cutting that nose, lowering it down, it was able to just lower, and all these lined up the way they're supposed to. And that's a common flaw that I see in these cars. But yeah, I'm really excited about how all this came together. And I'm able to get all of the gaps on the other side. So I need to get this car turned around here in my shop so that I can work on the other side. So I'm going to get it to set this way, and then I'll be able to have better lighting. The lighting on the other side by my bench, too many shadows. It's too difficult to do this kind of work. So that's why I did all this side, got perfect lighting. Now I'll turn around and I'll show you where I am on the other side and all my metal work. And then I can start spreading filler on that side. Anyway, I've got it turned around now. I've got good lighting on this side. Now I can start doing the body work. If this is something you're interested in, I want to try to spend as much time as I can welding over seams and using all metal. I've already done that on all this side, but I can show you where I've done it, and I need to do a little bit more on this rear fender so I can demonstrate that too, and the reasons why. And then I also have a little bit more metal work to do on this piece. This does come off, but all the metal work is done on the doors. I want to just kind of quickly go through that, and then we'll call it good for this video, and we can move on to the next one when it comes to actually demonstrating how I get these nice gaps and how I get filler to be able to smoothen across all of these panels. And I'll show you that with a straight edge. So this panel, this had a gap right here. It went underneath the fender by probably ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch. It was just an ugly gap. So I want this to be smooth transition across not only the cowl, but across the hood. And you can see I'm still about 1/8 of an inch, but I can tap that hood in a little bit, and you can see I've got quite a bit of filler on here. I've got probably 3 coats. I went extra heavy here just so that I could sand it down and get these 2 panels to meet. This has a nice blend. You can see it's perfectly lined up. Door-wise, doors and panels and the stampings from the 50s and the 60s, they had a tendency to roll in on all the edges. And they had a pretty big radius here versus a real fine radius that I've been tapping in. So this gap was really super tight, so I just took a hammer and I went down along this edge and I tapped it all back. By tapping it back, it did 2 things. One, it gave me a crisp edge, and two, it opened up this gap and pushed this edge outwards a little bit where it was diving in. And the same thing with the door. This edge was diving in. Well, it's a really thin edge. And if I just build this up with filler, then this edge would be fat. And that just looks terrible. It's obvious that it's not the way the manufacturer does these seams. And they roll it over and spot weld along this seam. So I take the door off and I tap all this out, and I just keep going back and forth and making sure that panel is perfectly flat. So you can see I need to adjust my door. I'm just a little bit off. I'm probably about a 1/16 of an inch off on the door. I need to bring it down, but this door is now flat. And this panel is flat. So it's just a matter of getting that gap where it needs to be. And you can see as I get down to the bottom, I've got a good smooth transition all the way across. I've got a tiny bit of wave, like right there where the door handle used to be. Just a teeny bit of a low spot. So I feel really good. This door will only have a skim coat on it. It might have 2 thin coats right here and maybe around the edges, but overall super flat, and the alignment is really good, and my gaps are just awesome gaps all the way around. It's a little tight right here, so, but it's also a little bit low right here, so if I tap this with a hammer, and it will push this edge down and it will bulge this edge out, so this will end up smoothing out really well. Here's all metal on this seam. I welded over this seam and put all metal on it. You can see where I welded and put in a patch panel right here. I've put a coat of all metal over that to cover up those weld marks. And what I did is I did a thin coat of filler all along this fender so that I could put it on, and then I put masking tape on it. Now I can go back and put filler all along here, and this fender doesn't end up being bonded together with the cowl side. And then I'll demonstrate on how I get these edges so that I don't fill up the seam with filler. And then the same thing with these door gaps. When I skim coat across all of this with filler, I don't want to just squish it into this seam, so I'll show you how I do that too. It's pretty cool. Looks like I haven't got all my holes welded over. I thought I was ready to spread filler on this side, but I have a few more holes that I missed, and I have a little dent right there that I need to massage. And then I need to work this area a little bit more from my gas tank. You can see I've got a little bit of a high spot along here, a little bit of a high spot along here. So once I put filler, skim coat over this whole panel, then I'll be able to get that all smooth too. Alright, well, I hope you find this informative. I mean, if you're watching this video, it's because you want to learn. I mostly just wanted to talk about how I did it, and now in the next video I'm going to actually demonstrate on how to do it yourself and really go more in detail about the way some of these gaps are made and how I keep from getting filler in those gaps. And yeah, we'll just kind of see as we play it through. All right, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Till next time, goodbye for now.